Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you're doing well, staying safe, taking care of those closest to you, as I say. I am recording this late Sunday night, the day before it comes out. This is a long weekend, great weekend, but a long weekend. Did a lot of fun things this past weekend. I went and did axe throwing for the first time with my wife on Saturday. Bicycled there and back. That was a really good time. I know that axe throwing is kind of like the hipster thing du jour now. But I got really into it. Like, I managed to hit a couple of bullseyes, and I sort of I understood the appeal. So probably going to do that again. My friend Mike, who has been on the show before, we went and saw the New York Islanders. Sadly fell 5-2 to the Carolina Hurricanes. I don't go to hockey often, but I always have a really good time when I do. Folks on the show know I am obsessed with soccer or football for my international listeners. But occasionally I do have the opportunity to see hockey, and I've seen the Islanders more than I've seen other teams, and it was a really good time. Despite the result, I do enjoy watching ice hockey live. I find it quite fun to watch. And then today, for the first time, went and saw all of the exhibits at the American Museum of Natural History. Been in New York for, we're coming up on, this will be my 13th year this summer. Still had never been to the Natural History Museum, and it was quite delightful. There were some cool shark exhibits. I got this great hat that has shark teeth along the under brim, and the classic shark like coming up from the Jaws poster. And that sorta is my identity for right now. I'm the guy with that hat. And I'm really into it. And I'm really into our episode this week, because this is this episode is many years in the making. I had wanted to get this interview to happen, so I'm really excited to share it with you. My guest on the show today is Shane Snider. Shane's done a lot of things in show business. He's done stand-up comedy. He has done comedic storytelling. He has written scripts. He streams on Twitch. My friend David Lawson suggested that I reach out to Shane a few years ago, and I did. And Shane's not super plugged into social media, but he, out of the blue, I got this message from him, and was super excited to finally sit down and get to chat with him, because all I knew about Shane is that he's funny, he's a good storyteller, and I knew, and his dad sings for a band that I really like from the 80s. So we are going to talk a little bit about that, but I mostly wanted to make sure that I talked to Shane about his life and his art and his career. And we end up talking about some like really kind of real stuff. There's some like the kind of stuff that I like to have. Like there's some stuff that Shane really had to overcome, and some really odd serendipitous experiences. But I'm really happy to see him like feeling very grounded in what he's doing now. So if you dig this, I'll have links to Shane and what he does in the description. So make sure you guys check that out as well. And if you enjoy this, I also want to thank again everyone who has been a part of the show for the past now 301 episodes. I really enjoy doing this podcast, so thank you all for being here for that. And I can't wait to do another 300 and see what happens next, because the universe is a ever expanding ball of possibilities. So I have the planetarium from the Natural History Museum on my mind right now, so I'm very much like cosmically oriented, and in a way that plays in heavily to our conversation with Shane today. So thank you all again so much for being here, and let's talk to Shane Snider. So yes, the story is, and this is probably the longest brewing interview I've done on the show before, but the story is, I know David Lawson. David Lawson was actually like the first guest on this podcast ever.
Wow.
So I know him from like the storytelling community in New York City. And he said to me, "Oh, you should have Shane Snider on. He's a really great storyteller. And he's also Dee Snider's son, the lead singer of Twisted Sister." Because David knows I'm a metal guy. So I was like, "Oh, I bet he's got an interesting life story. I should chat with Shane." So I sent you a message, and then 4 years later, here we are.
Oh my God, it was 4 years? I thought it was a year ago. But yeah, I dropped social media like some years ago and I never turned back. And then recently my sister, she's got this like great business brewing and I was talking to her about it and she was like, "You got to just embrace social media. It's just the way of the future. Stop fighting it." I was like, "All right, I'll go back." And then I just had this laundry list of messages that apparently have been there for 4 or 5 years.
Oh, I bet at least like 90% of them are like, "Hey, can you introduce me to your dad or Mick Foley
I
or other
get
famous
that
people?"
occasionally. Like you can kind of, if I'm being honest, if there's one thing growing up with the rock star dad gives you, it's a. Oh God, sorry, my cat's walking into the microphone. It's
Oh, no worries.
it's a sense of when somebody is like that. So when somebody has that kind of thing where they're like really into famous people or all they want is to get through you to someone else, you
Right.
get this feeling almost immediately. I remember in college, there was this girl that was kind of cute and we were hanging out in the same friend group and every so often we would talk and within minutes, it would always come back to my dad or who I knew or what I had done. It wasn't like a conversation. It was like she was not looking at me. Oh my
Right.
God. I might have to kick this cat out of the room.
Oh, it's
You
it's
can
okay.
see.
These are like some of the fun little things I love about doing podcasts is like if you're doing like interviews for like Sirius XM or what have you, like in like real like high tech studios, like you don't get like your cat's adorable, by the way.
Oh, thank you. He almost just
You
fell
don't
off.
you don't get stuff like that. I remember an early episode having to like answer the door because my girlfriend and then girlfriend, now wife, ordered Thai and I didn't know.
So in the middle of it, you have to go do it. But that's great. It's authentic. It's authentic. It's authentic to the life.
Exactly. But to your point, yeah, I can imagine like, so you're probably around like, like all the like kind of behind the music stories about like the ancillary kind of hangers on of show business. I imagine like you develop a filter for like bullshit like very, very early.
Yeah, and there's okay, so there was like I remember I hung out with I had this friend group for a little while. If you know Christina Hutchinson, she has
Uh-huh.
a successful podcast as well. She and I used to hang out a lot, and there was this friend in that group, and we would like go to bars, and she would say, "Why don't you tell them who your dad is? Why don't you do that?" And I'd be like, "Because they don't care. They don't give a fuck." And growing up, if you watch a movie, if you watch a TV show, and there is a guy they don't want you to like, more than half the time, that character is going, "Don't you know who my dad is?" Because everybody
Yes.
hates the entitled jackass that thinks somehow their parents' prestige or power influence is somehow bequeathed to them in some way. So
Right.
you also very quickly go, "I'm not telling anybody." And you kind of have to make the choice. Either A, I think there are people out there that probably do embrace the hangers on and the abusers because they like that sense of I don't know, that there are people around them that think that means something. Or you do the opposite
Right.
and you find only people that don't care at all. And to me, that's a better friendship. And like my wife, like had no idea who he was, does not give a fuck. And
Mm-hmm.
oh, can I curse? Is that okay?
Fuck yeah.
Okay, great. Does not give a fuck, and I prefer that. If you do care, that's fine. But it's just like as long as it's, like I don't know, as long as you're not weird about it. There are lots of weirdos.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially in like heavy metal fandom. Like I'm finding this recently, even in more like modern metal fandom. This like the diehards are a very, very touchy bunch, and yeah, I imagine like in terms of like healthy relationships, it's probably not. It probably wouldn't be like the best dynamic if at Thanksgiving, uh, your wife is just like, so uh so tell me how you wrote the price, like, because you weren't known as like a power ballad band, but you had the one power ballad, so let's talk about that trope for 40 minutes. um
That's a
you know
semi-deep cut. That's good. That's like, that's his third hit, sort of hit, when the power ballad era was a thing. Like, he had the price on MTV for a little bit there. So that's good. That you're cutting in deep. But yeah,
oh
we've had, and like that's happened before. Like I've had one of my sister's boyfriends came to Christmas. We didn't know him, and he's asking me questions on how to talk to my dad and whatever. And I'm just like, oh, this is how you talk to my dad: is you don't mess with my sister at all, and you
yeah,
just
no,
say yes,
totally.
sir. Like you are dating his daughter. You do not start like approaching him about his music career. And he's like, but what if I want to get advice on my music career? I'm like, oh God, this is not going to be good.
Yeah, it reminds me of the from the movie Funny People, the scene where Adam Sandler's character shows up at the like Friendsgiving, and Bo Burnham's character's just like, "Oh, I'm an actor too," and he's just like, "Great, whoop, out of there." um, uh, so let me ask you this. I imagine that's a slightly unusual dynamic growing up. So I'm curious, like, where did you primarily grow up? You're in LA now, but did you grow up in New York?
Long Island. Yep, New York, born and raised. Um,
Gotcha. Right on. So did you like grow up like coming into the city to like see shows and stuff, or were you kind of like, because I've heard of these like Long Islanders who like never go to the city. I'm just like, why? It's right there.
yeah. It's New York City is the place to go if you're on Long Island. We kind of did it for Christmas trips. It was sort of like a
Uh-huh.
yearly thing where of course we would go to New York City for like whatever, He did live a cool still does live a cool life. Like he was did a show on Broadway, or he was in Celebrity Apprentice. So like of course there was always times we were doing trips into the city. He's recording a VH1 special. We were going to TRL or whatever. Like that
Uh-huh.
was some like a factor for sure. But we went to New
Yeah.
York City pretty frequently, and then of course we had like our yearly Christmas tradition of going and seeing the tree and the Rockettes and Times
Mhm.
Square. So New York City, especially if you're a Long Islander, is the only place you can really go. You can't escape Long Island without going through Manhattan. So it is
Right.
your gateway to the world. And then as you leave New York City, you're like, wait, why are we leaving New York City? So it's really there's only one other place you go to if you live on Long Island is straight to New York City and back. But it kind of gets you into a weird way where when I lived in New York City. I'm assuming you're there now, right?
Yeah, I live in Astoria.
Oh, I love Astoria, dude. Astoria is my favorite place I've ever lived.
Oh,
And
it's
I
great.
lived in the boroughs and Manhattan for like 12 years, and I sort of
Mhm.
started feeling like trapped because you don't. At least for me, I didn't have a car, and you're
Yeah.
kind of like relying on the public transit, and and I grew up in Long Island, and Astoria is
Mhm.
technically part of Long Island. And actually,
Yes.
fun story, looping this all back together. So when I first moved to Astoria, we were over off like the 30th Avenue stop on the N train, and
Mhm.
my dad helped me move. And we stepped out of our place, and he looks to the left, and he goes, "That's the hospital I was born in." And I lived
Oh,
right
no
down
way.
the block from I think it's Mount Sinai, off the
Uh-huh. Yeah,
yep.
yeah.
And he was born in that very hospital. And then to follow that up one more time extra, if you know Astoria Park, right, with the public pool in it,
Mhm. Sure do. I love that pool.
it's a great place. And I told my grandmother, my dad's mother, that I was living in Astoria, and she just says, "Are you by the park?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, do they still have the pool? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, when I was a little girl, I grew up in Astoria and they were building that pool. And me and my friends used to go and wait at the gate every day. And when it opened, the whole town all went to this pool and it was packed. And me and my friends would go every day all summer. I was like, that's wild. So Astoria, beyond it being just like a beautiful place to live with amazing people and great culture, also had like
Yeah.
a history in my family, which was really cool.
Oh, that's spectacular. That's a sort of like because I don't think that pool has changed much since it was your grandma was going there.
I
So
don't
I'm
think so.
just imagining like the swim attire of the era and just being like, "Oh, hey, how you doing, Donna?" There's just always someone named Donna around, you know. Um
Oh,
so
100%. Yeah, there were a million Donnas back then in the
uh-huh.
40s.
Oh, 100%. And was your mom creative as well? Was she like into music or art in any way?
Yeah, actually, this is a story most people probably don't know about my mom is that I think it'd be fair to say that she is one of the masterminds of Twisted Sister, of my dad's
Really?
band. So my dad,
Mhm.
I don't know if we've covered this yet. So he was in this band Twisted Sister. They're
Yep.
known for the two big songs, "We're Not Gonna Take It" and "I Want to Rock," and then "The Price" at a soft number three. Didn't have the staying power. And but they wore these like big costumes, and they had my mom designed all of those. My mom,
Really?
at a very young age, she was 15 when she met my dad. My dad was 21,
Mhm.
so little pushing it. Now it's fine, you know. But
Yeah,
back then it was
sure,
pushing
sure.
it. And she was still in high school, but she wanted to design clothes. And my dad was kind of already doing this like drag thing where
Mhm.
he really loved the New York Dolls and a lot of like that sort of glam rock era. And he famously was wearing a shirt the night he met my mom that said, "I'm D, blow me." And
Sounds on brand.
yeah, it was very on brand. And my mom, when they started dating, she was just like hated his outfits. He would wear this like really like garish makeup and like rouge and stuff. And he was doing it a little bit more like he was a pretty boy, but my dad's not a
Mhm.
pretty boy. And my mom hated his stuff. But to him, it was like he was making a statement against beauty or something. And my
Uh-huh.
mom started being like, no, like we're gonna turn your costume should be like battle attire, but we're like gonna change what your battle attire is. And she changed his like soft rouges and his like little speck of a mole and stuff into very angular designs that she borrowed from Native American cultures that use like thick lines as war paint. And
Yeah.
she would start to like, and she literally made it like color by numbers of like, you do this triangle, you do this triangle, this, you draw this like five sided shape around your eyes. It's a big mole. It's not like a dot. It's a big like garish mole. It's a big strong shape. And then with his costumes, would put shoulder pads, like football shoulder pads in there.
Uh-huh.
Would add studs. She says that she is the first person in metal to add studs to clothing. That she started
Mhm.
that, but she was like trying to make it like physically metal, like it felt like it would hurt. And she would keep the colors and the tights, and they're still wearing makeup, of course, the big hair. And she gave each guy in the band their own thing, but she took them from being like glam into being big, and she turned them into kind of like monsters, sort of drag
Yeah.
monsters. And she also famously, um, the story goes, my mom designed their logo, which is this TS kind of as like one kind of diamond shape, and
Mhm.
they were doing the Stay Hungry album, and my dad said, I want to do the TS, but I want to do it in like bones. And my mom was sitting at their coffee table in the morning one day, probably 1981 or something, and just hand drew a bone TS on the table on like a napkin and was like, something
Mhm.
like this. And he was like, yeah, that's great. He brought it to Atlantic Records and said, "I want this something like this to be our logo," and they just like what they did with the Simpsons or something. They just traced it exactly and stuck it on the album. So my mom will still to this day be like, "That was a first draft. Like I didn't. It was meant to be a building point. It was not supposed to be the logo." But she designed their makeup, designed their costumes. Multiple of their like platinum records and stuff in our house were dedicated to my mom. She was the sixth member of the band. Everybody knew her. Everybody loved her. And I've had people tell me that Twisted Sister was my mom and dad's like first child. That they
Uh-huh.
gave birth to this concept and they designed it together and they were like workshopping this idea together.
That's spectacular. I'm so glad we have like on the record the your mom's creative like visual aesthetic. That's fantastic because you're absolutely right, and I swear I want to talk about you too, but I just thinking about that, it's almost sort of like I think of a couple of things. Like I think of that 90s like shoulder power suit that became the rage for like women, business women in the
With
90s.
the padded shoulders, yeah.
I feel like that's you like she progenerated that, like birthed that idea. And yeah, almost like a like a like jocular like masculine version of like the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh,
Almost is kind of like the aesthetic of Twisted Sister. Um
they.
Now when you were
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just got some. I got to interject a little bit. So apparently, they when the Rocky Horror Picture Show first came out, it wasn't the cult classic instantaneously like it is today. My dad
Yeah, it bombed,
partially
right?
takes credit for spreading it around New York and the metropolitan area. Apparently, he and the band had went gone to a midnight showing in the Lower East Side where they did some shows and
Mhm.
seen it and took inspiration from it and started doing the time warp around at their shows. Um,
Nice.
and and started spreading around. They think that's part of it. And then my another weird thing, my mom, so she went to FIT for clothing design on a scholarship. She was like
Uh-huh.
she's a really talented clothing designer. I can go on and on about the crazy stuff she's done in my life, but let's just say I won every year's best Halloween costume growing up because my mom would make it for me, and she there was a big thing in the 80s, I want to say, or late 70s, of wearing like a sweatshirt with like the collar cut out so it like hung
Uh-huh.
over one shoulder. And she had apparently she according to them, I wasn't there, she designed that, would wear that all the time. After she left FIT, she had a job offer from H&M to join that to work for H&M, but she didn't
Mhm.
like the idea that H&M was going to take her stuff and stick their name on it and refused the job. And they stole her design and made popular this sweatshirt with the collar cut off that hung
Ugh.
around the shoulder, but that was actually her design.
Corporate America, man. That's gnarly. I know that make all of that makes total sense to me. So now when you were like coming of age, so you're surrounded by all this like 80s metal and glam rock and like the progenitors of like punk, the New York Dolls. So when you were like younger, were you like a big music person, or did you find like I'm gonna find like have a moment where you're like I'm gonna find my own thing and get into that? Like what kind of kid were you?
So, okay, I would say that I think I wasn't surrounded in this culture at all. When I grew
Mm-hmm.
up, my dad's band had been broken up basically before I was born. He had gone into what I would call like a career depression and a both depression of like financially and on many levels. He was in a different world. He was like biking to my uncle's job at my uncle owned a gym and he was like the clerk at a gym growing up. You know, my mom was doing makeup for weddings and stuff to get by. Like when
Mm-hmm.
I was growing up, it was like very different than I think a lot of people imagine. It was like he had lost all of his money. He had, classic thing of he didn't pay any taxes on his income. He didn't think about it. He had spent all of his money on cars, And then when the
Sure.
band broke up, which was partially due to the events of the PMRC hearings, which is a whole other thing that happened again before I was born.
Yeah.
The band dismantled, and it was not like it was almost something he hid because
Mhm.
he was still famous. He has a very recognizable face and big hair, but he did not really want people to know or see him. He really didn't want to. So it wasn't like I was at all super exposed to music in any way. He like there were no instruments
Right.
in my house. I would say the first time I ever got into music was like fourth grade. You could sign up for orchestra or band, and
Uh-huh.
I signed, which of course I knew the Twisted Sister, and like We're Not Gonna Take It has that great opening drum cadence. Boom, ba, boom, da, ba, dum, ba, ba. Love it. AJ Parrow, rest in peace. Love you, man. And
Yes.
he so that had really stuck out to me, and I signed up for drums. And they were like,
Uh-huh.
put a second one in case you don't get your first pick. And I put trumpet because it was like the only instrument I could think of. And I
Mhm.
got trumpet. And I remember going to my dad, like, oh, I don't want to play trumpet. I want to play drums. And my dad just immediately picked up the phone and was like, listen, this kid can't be a trumpet player. This kid's going to be a drummer. You gotta get him in the drum program. And of course, I was in the drums the next day. But it was like, that was maybe the first bit I saw him being like, no son of mine's playing the trumpet. And
Amazing.
but I started playing drums, and then I
Mhm.
got, of course, really into that as a teenager. And he had been gifted some drum set in the 80s that sat in my grandfather's basement that we pulled out. That was like a hot pink uh, drum set that was super sweet. So I
Mhm.
played that, but he was not like somebody who ever said, you have to do what I do. He was always someone who said, believe in your dreams and do what you want. You decide your own life and your own fate. He had,
Mhm.
he has on tattooed on his arm, legitimus non carborundum s, which is Latin for never let the bastards wear you down. And he had a real
Mhm.
philosophy that, and a fire lit inside of him at an early age, that was, I'm going to stick it to all the people that ever doubted me. I'm going to shove it in their face, my success. And he really was driven to success because he wanted to prove people wrong. And he tells stories of being a fry cook and being a janitor, being, working in a convenience store, and telling people I'm going to be a rock star. And people would say, okay, yeah, rock star. Why don't you go clean up the vomit in aisle 3 and, shove the mop in his hand and
Yeah.
stick it to him and try to put him in his place. And he would just say, someday I'm gonna like he almost had like a list in his head, like I'm gonna get famous, I'm gonna come back here, I'm gonna like go puke in that aisle and make him clean it or something. Like he had a
Right.
real chip on his shoulder. But I definitely didn't have that. Like, it's weird. His dad was, it was kind of normal to be an abusive parent in the 50s. His dad was kind of
Mhm.
abusive to him, and he really stuck it to his dad when he started to succeed, and kind of made it publicly known of like kind of like a big fuck you dad. But it was weird, 'cause I didn't have that. So like I even at one point we did puppet Shakespeare at a Shakespeare puppet company. That's how actually I know David Lawson. He played
Uh-huh.
Prince in our Romeo and Juliet on that was somewhere off Broadway. And we did an interview together. He was a producer when we did off Broadway, this whole thing. But it was like we were basically
Uh-huh.
bringing him in to help with promotion and stuff. He's famous,
Yeah.
gets into, opens doors. So I remember we did an interview, and they were like, "What's your philosophy and what do you pass on to your child?" And like he was like, "Oh, don't listen to what anyone ever tells you. Like you can do whatever you want. You're the master of your own destiny." Yada yada yada. And I just stopped. I was just like, I just don't feel like that's actually what you taught me at all. I was like, I think what you taught me is to believe in yourself and to do what you want to do and to be free, and like, and that whatever I want to do, you'll support me. And that's all I got from it. So
Right.
it was
But
like,
that's a great lesson.
yeah, it is. And he
That's really good.
and that's also what, like, I've met so many people that love him, that
Mhm.
were fans of his, and that's what they got. And I don't think I really understood it until recently.
Yeah.
There's because I didn't grow up in his household, I didn't
Hmm.
understand it. I didn't understand what he had gone through and what it feels like to be in a house where somebody's trying to tell you what you are and what you can be. And
Yeah.
I I went to Ireland with my now wife, but we had just started dating, and
Hmm.
my wife is Irish, like off the boat immigrant, and her family
Hmm.
lives in a small town in Northern Ireland called Rostraver. And when we went there, um, I every time I grabbed a fork from a drawer or a saucer from the cabinet, it was like I was doing it wrong. I was doing it wrong. She would constantly the mom would comment on our piercings, on tattoos. She didn't like the way we dressed. And it wasn't she wasn't like necessarily overbearing with it, but there was this constant feeling of just like you can't do anything right. You just can't do anything right. Why can't you just do it right? And it got to the point where I was just like, we were laying in bed and we would be awake for hours and just not going downstairs. We would just be sitting in bed on our phones, just avoiding
Hmm.
going downstairs. And I was just like, all I want to do is kick her out the window and scream, I want to rock. like, like, and I found myself watching my dad's music videos as a way of solace. And I realized these kids that were there were kids in the world watching these music videos and seeing the dad oppressing this kid and telling them, "You are nothing. You will be nothing. What? I carry an M16 and you carry that electric twanger." You know, and he screams the dad
Yeah.
out the window, and it was a liberation to them. And I was doing some work with stupid buddies. They do like Robot Chicken and stuff.
Uh-huh.
They wanted to do a Christmas movie with my dad, and they had this treatment, and the treatment was like it was like this kind of like it was very silly. It was like D. Snider goes to the North Pole and rocks out with Santa Claus, and
Sure.
we just weren't feeling it. And I was just like, and I did that trip, and I was just like, oh my god! I was like, this is what every kid who got into Twisted Sister, they had this feeling. They had this feeling like I don't want to go downstairs. I don't even want to get up in the morning. I just want to hide in my room and play rock
Yeah.
music and just hide from not necessarily the world, but hide from my parents. And I went back to them and we had sat down this meeting and I was just like, I just had an experience. I told them the whole thing about Ireland. And I was like, can we just do a story about a kid and all he wants for Christmas is an electric guitar and his dad won't get it for him because his dad doesn't want him to be into music. And
Right.
I asked him, I was like, because like when you got into it, like what was your situation? And one of the head Harv Harvenstein, known as Harv, said, I grew up in a really religious household, and my parents
Hmm.
didn't want me doing art, and all I wanted to do was draw and have fun and make fun stuff, and they really wanted me to do something serious. And when I found Twisted Sister, it was just like it was my way to get out of my cage. And I was like, "That's
Yeah.
it! Like that's it!" Um, and that was and that to me is like the best thing. And I don't think my dad knew it. Um, Sometimes you hear like I've heard Seth Rogen talk about how people come up to him and say, "Superbad is exactly my life," and Seth Rogen's like,
Yeah.
"But Superbad was exactly my life." And to my dad, that was exactly his life, but he didn't realize there were other people going through what he went through. And he got to be that
Yeah.
face and that angry yell of every kid that feels like just shut up and let me do what I want to do. I'm sick of being
Yeah.
told what I can be. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's also great that he didn't pass on that trauma to me because let it. Some parents,
No, no. Yeah, no, exactly. Like learn like he sounds like he really like corrected the sins of the father so to speak when in your life. And yeah, like to kind of represent to have someone like to be seen to have like a piece of art like feel like represent to you like that you are seen like your experience is valid or and you are not alone and to be that sort of cathartic, like, fuck you to whatever it is, because we all, so many people have like something like that that they just want to like I don't know if it's like a parent figure, boss, university university like disciplinary board. There is some moment where everyone just wants to like scream and like let it all out, and to like represent that. Like I think of this quote that Mark Maron said a lot on his podcast, where he talks about like being the best thing you can do as a comic is make somebody feel less alone. And that, it sounds like that this idea is like very much ingrained in you, because you don't seem like you have this sort of kind of like menacing darkness. Like you look like an emo kid and you're wearing like a psychedelic Pokemon outfit, which I love, by the way.
Oh, thank
Like
you, thank you.
there's a lightness of your vibe, but I'm loving what you're putting down here, Shane. So in the midst of all this, as you're like coming of age, where does comedy come into this? Like, did you like stand-up comedians when growing up? When did you become aware of stand-up or like storytelling to an extent as like a thing that you could do?
It's funny as it's like a really formative moment, but my younger brother was born pretty soon after me. He was like, a year and a half. And I was
Mm-hmm.
weirdly enough like a very I struggled with depression even as a child. My parents have like stories of me watching the news at like 2 just crying because the news
Uh-huh.
is sad.
Well, that's
Yeah.
understandable.
And but I was a very quiet kid. And I was very well behaved. I had like, a pacifier and a nanny. And then when my brother was born, my brother was just like an insane ball of energy, just like blah, 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 blah. And he's
Uh-huh.
super funny, he's super entertaining. And he was just constantly like, he would come up with songs. Some of them would be about me, some of them would be about how great he was. The Crayfish
Mm-hmm.
Hunter was a great song of his. But he's this stuff, and it was just like, I I didn't know how to get attention. And I remember I was always getting like told like, oh, like you're so smart as like a little kid. What that amounted to now. Going into the arts, not so smart. So but uh there was this point where Cody was like my younger brother was like making my family laugh, and I must have been like 4 years old. And I was just like, man, I want to make everybody laugh. And I thought, well, maybe there's a way I could figure it out. Like the people are telling me I'm smart. Maybe I can figure out what makes people laugh. And then that's how I'll get attention. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember at a pretty, I want to say like 6 years old, maybe 5 years old. We had moved to a new house and I discovered Comedy Central, and
Uh-huh.
there was a show called Make Me Laugh, where they would pull an audience member in and sit them on a chair, and
I remember
comics
this
had
show. Yeah.
to make the person laugh. And if the person didn't laugh, they like won some money. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I never forget, there was some guy who just kept coming up and doing the exact same joke, which was, my wife is so kinky, she's got mirrors up on the ceiling. And I had no idea what it meant. And he just kept saying it. And everybody just kept laughing like harder and harder each time he would say it, because he just kept being like, it's not funny, but he kept saying it. And I
Yeah.
would watch this show, and it was literally called like Make Me Laugh. And I would like be watching it, and I would remember just asking my mom like, why is that funny? What does that word mean? Like, why are they laughing at this? And we would watch Saturday Night Live, and I would just constantly be asking me like, why is that funny? Like, what happened there?
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of came about, and then you start getting into this mode of like, I think I could figure this out. And then you go to school, and school's different, and you get to be the class clown and make people laugh, and that just ended up being
Mm-hmm.
my happy place. And also, like, when you're struggling with depression, like, comedy is the way to alleviate that. And the problem is
Yeah.
it's temporary and you can't do it alone. And
Mm-hmm.
but that's the weird thing, of the sad clown, right? It's like you go out on the stage, you make everyone laugh, everybody's having a great time, you're on cloud nine, and then you go home alone and you fucking hate yourself. And you hate
Mm-hmm.
where you are and what you're doing, and you don't feel good enough. But there was like a lot of times where comedy was it. Comedy was like what got me out of a hole. But then what ended up happening is because there was a thing comedians say, which is that if you don't need comedy, you'll never succeed. And I really took that to heart and I needed it. I really needed it. I
Hmm.
needed comedy to succeed. And I remember there was a point where I just lost, some job. I can't remember what job it was. And I was updating my resume and my resume was only comedy. And I was just like, oh God, I need to succeed. And I was doing a series of charity shows, and they had me back. I must have been like my third year in a row, and I was feeling really good at this point. I had my set down. I was like rocking it, but they gave me more time than usually like I'd ever got, and this is one of my rare paid gigs. They were giving me 30
Hmm.
minutes to 40 minutes, which was like insane. Like I had like
Yeah.
10 minutes of good material. Top.
Yeah. Yeah. Those early feature spots you get before you're really ready for it. I know all about that for
Yeah.
sure.
So it's like, all right, so you're gonna start bringing in your B materials and your C materials, and so, this stuff didn't really work in the open mic, but I'm gonna try it out anyway. And uh, but I just remember I did this show. I came in dressed in a pink tux. I had my sister filming it for me. I bombed for 30 minutes straight and I didn't get off the stage. And oh my God, it's the worst feeling in the world. Oh my God, it's the worst feeling. And also just like when you need it and it's one of your rare paid gigs and
Yep.
and now I've developed a relationship with the booking agent and they're liking me and I'm developing a reputation
Hmm.
and then you bomb and you ruin that relationship and you ruin that reputation and you're not booked next year. Oh my God, does it suck? So it just like the
Yeah.
high highs are great, but the low lows, they were rough. So I'm sorry if this is a roundabout answer, a way of saying it, but like really, I think it came from having to deal with depression, and that was like, and also trying to find out like what is my voice and what is my art. I'd never been really encouraged about my singing, so I never really thought about that. I played
Sure.
drums, but I wasn't great. Like I practiced, but I was never perfect. Um,
Hmm.
and it wasn't necessarily my passion. Like I love it. I love playing drums. It's just the best way to get into the zone of music, but it wasn't my thing. And stand up was something also I understood. Like grow up with a front man as a father, it's like you really kind of are thinking like, what's the way I get in the spotlight?
Sure. Yeah, no, no, naturally. I like when you learn the mythos and you're just kind of like, oh, and then again, especially you get that sort of like rush of attention that happens when like you're just being funny at like at a family gathering or what have you. It's like, ooh, and talking about those highs and lows, I remember like my early years in New York when I was like really hardcore, like just any gig I can get hitting every single open mic. And I remember doing this gig somewhere in New Jersey and I didn't have a car, so I took the ferry and then I ended up walking behind like the New Jersey Transit up this cliff that had a staircase to get to this gig. And it was raining the whole time. It was a real like dark night of the soul kind of experience. But I crushed. And then I was able, and then the other comics were like, "We're all getting the bus. You want to come with us?" I was like, "Yes." So that's the fucked up thing about comedy is you'll go through 500 of those. What the fuck am I doing with my life? Bombing sets in at like a charity banquet where everyone's just talking to each other and not paying attention to you to chase that one great set. Or I've had this in storytelling shows also, like when you're telling a story that's like really got some pathos and you're like really connecting with the crowd. It's like there are few ways to feel that way that don't require ingesting something.
Yeah, dude, it's still like the when it kills, like you still have that moment years later. Like I still fondly remember those great moments. Like there's no feeling better than like you make some joke and everybody laughs and then you go to interrupt it and you can't. Like they're just like you can't stop them. You can't quiet them down. Like that's such a good feeling. But they're like Dark Night of the Soul. That let me if you don't mind me sharing one myself.
Of
I
course.
so I at my worst, and I'm much better now. I have a whole story about healing my depression. That's a whole thing. But like at my worst, where I was like, I won't say I was suicidal, but I was romancing the concept of death. And I was starting to get into this
Mm-hmm.
mode where I was just sort of like actively wondering, what would happen if that bus hit me? Maybe I could go into a coma for a few months. Like dark fucking stuff. Like I remember a couple times in New York City just walking through traffic and just stopping before and the light would turn green and just standing in traffic and cars going around me, just like, and then just being like,
Whoa.
ah,
Yeah.
okay, all right, they're not gonna hit me, you know. And but the one day I did that, and like, you know, really sad. I was doing this shoot. I had a friend of mine. He was doing a thing. He had this idea for doing like a beer pong like wrestling league where people would do characters and you would go and do this like beer pong league at a bar and it'd be like an event and
Mm-hmm.
you would do smack talk videos and stuff. And my character and my partner were like homeless and that was like our shtick and that we're just that was our characters. We're homeless people. And I came and do this recording and I was making jokes about being depressed, wanting to die, having nothing to live for, wishing cars would hit me, and I was killing. And it was like people were laughing so much. So it was like I was actively turning my darkness into laughter. And there was also a part of
Mm-hmm.
me that felt like, oh, this is what I have to go through to make people laugh. Like people like this. People want you to like talk about your struggle of the very existence of being because it's something we're all going through. And
Yep.
that I don't, I think there's a truth to it. Um, as the Buddha said, life is suffering. That is the inherent truth of existence. And to live is to suffer. But that doesn't mean life is all suffering. And that
Right.
and this is kind of leads to the my path of getting through it was finding Buddhism is weirdly was like so huge for me because
Uh-huh.
it was a religion that at its key tenet acknowledged that life was suffering and then said, but the path of
Mm-hmm.
the Buddha is the cessation of suffering. And this is how you do it. And it was just like, oh my God, you said it. You said it. It sucks. Like, and this is the thing is like, no, life doesn't all suck, but there are inherent aspects to life of death, decay, the cycles that we're stuck in that were inescapable, the societal
Mm-hmm.
failures that we're all so aware of, but none of us are able to stop because we are so stuck in our ways as a collective. Those things can weigh on you, but they're not
Mm-hmm.
everything life has to offer you. So
Exactly.
and it felt like, at least to me back then, like wallowing in pain was the way of the artist, right? Like you had to sort of. There's actually a thing in the Royal Tenenbaums about this, right? Where the guy writes
Oh,
some
it's been a
book.
while since I've seen it.
She said I think it's Kathy Bates comes up to like Owen Wilson. It's like, isn't it the role of the artist not to wallow in the pain of humanity, but to lead the way in the path of healing that pain? And he's like, get away from me. he's just he's just like
Yeah,
writes it off.
there's two very different ways of looking at that for sure. Um, I feel that way. Well, first off, I feel like this kind of describes like the philosophy of this podcast title, which is awesome and disaster. That was kind of like my mission statement when I started this. But I feel that way about like this is gonna sound like roundabout, very odd, but I think about like that way with ska music because ska is very upbeat party music. But if you were to read like some of the lyrics, like Real Big Fish lyrics, um, they can get kind of dark. You're dealing with like failed relationships and all of this stuff, but you're just kind of like getting through it with like trumpets and trombones to kind of like skank away the pain.
Dude, Less Than Jake is so depressing. And I actually have this is so bizarre you would mention ska with this. I have a story about ska and depression if you would care to hear it.
Oh, please do. I'm loving this.
Okay, so this one gets out there. This one gets out there. So this kind of talks about this is actually the end of my depression. This is where it goes. So when I
Mm-hmm.
was depressed, I was a super staunch atheist. I had no spirituality in me. I was someone who didn't believe at all.
Mm-hmm.
My uncle Vinny on my mom's side, my mother's brother, who also struggled with depressions with a lot, and also orchestrated events that would lead to his eventual death, where he was shot in the streets of New York City by his best friend. My
Oh,
uncle
geez.
Vinny was in organized crime, and
Well, you kind of have to be with that name.
yeah, exactly right. Uh,
Sorry, but
Uncle
I've had to
Vinny.
say.
It's
Yeah,
could it get more cliche? I don't think so.
right.
um, so he had been shot, and then after he died, his ghost haunted my parents' house. Um, but I didn't believe
Mm.
in ghosts. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
and now I do, having had that experience. Um, there were times where, like one time, my somebody was playing my drums, and I thought it was my brother or sister, and I got really mad and I ran upstairs and nobody was in there, but all the electronics in my room were suddenly on. There were like amps in there. I had a band at the time, and nobody was
Uh-huh.
there. Nobody had done it. Multiple people heard it. Nobody had played the drums. My sister wasn't even home. My brother was outside. Nobody was even on that floor, and I went up the only
Mm-hmm.
staircase. Nobody was there. Multiple people heard it. Picture frames would fall off the wall. TVs would turn on and off and change channels. Famously, so my mom started to be like, because like when the trial started for his best friend, we knew this guy and we didn't necessarily want to support the trial against him unless we knew it was him. So my mom started
Right.
getting, and my mom was spiritual, started being like, I'm going to try to find out, talk to Vinny from the other side and see if he can tell me if it's him. And my mom was reading this book about ghosts, and it said ghosts can manipulate electronics, and if you talk to them, they'll do what you said, tell them to do if they're there. And my dad's watching TV, and my mom just goes, "Vinny, if you're here, do something to the TV." Immediately turns off. Like the second she says it, just turned off on a dime. So we started
Wow.
getting to this point where my mom was talking to Vinny like he was there, and she started to have the feeling like, oh, Vinny's here. Vinny's saying hi. She went to a medium. She went to one of the most famous mediums in the world, George Anderson, to talk to him about the death of her brother. And this guy like basically channels my dead uncle's spirit for a while and
Mm-hmm.
starts like saying all this stuff to her. And my mom was thought he was a fraud, but then my dad went and transcribed it and was like, oh my god, like he's like telling you everything that happened here. And there were things from the transcription from this seance or whatever you want to call it that
Mm-hmm.
would make more sense later on in this murder trial. One of the big ones is, so basically is like they did this armored car robbery. This, if I'm remembering correctly, there was this kid or younger person they had on this thing. This younger person shot a police officer during this armored car robbery. They didn't like that this kid killed a police officer during this, so they killed this kid. And the guilt of them killing this person that, oh, sorry, burp. The
No
guilt
worries.
of my uncle Vinny killing this guy he liked and had feelings for is what drove his depression. And he talked about it in the seance. He kept saying there was this boy, and none of us had ever heard. None of us knew he did an armored car robbery or killed this kid. None of us knew any of this stuff. But he was talking about it during this like seance, and then during the trial, it started coming out that this missing kid that had worked for him, and there was this crazy other level to it where the wife of this police officer and the kid had info on the armored car because this kid was dating the police officer's niece. It was so convoluted. But it got crazier and crazier, and some of the details started to come out there. So the point of all of this is, and it's gonna be weird. So my belief systems had been just beginning to start to change. I
Mm-hmm.
stopped being a devout atheist and started being like, okay, well, what if there are ghosts? Then how does the afterlife work? Are we trapped as a ghost forever? Is he in like a purgatory? Like what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing, and that's eventually how I found Buddhism and stuff. But it's like
Mm-hmm.
I started trying to figure it out. And I was at my like lowest point. I was at this point where I was like drinking alone. I would go get a six pack and just like get drunk in my room. And I had some, I loved my roommates, but like, I was probably not great to live with. And I was just in a bad place, and I remembered I was like sitting on the edge of my bed, just kind of like, being like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't get joy from anything anymore. Like, there's nothing I want to do. So how can I continue if I don't have anything I'm looking forward to? And I'm just like
Right.
head buried in my hands, and I just stuck into prayer, and I said, Vinny, if you're out there, if you're listening, if you really are alive on the other side somehow, like just give me a sign, do something to my computer, put on a song, give me some sign. Nothing happened. The next day, I went back to my parents' house for, and I was living in Astoria at the time, right at the place I mentioned before.
Yep.
I went back to my parents' place and I just came clean and just said I was depressed and I was not good and I was not happy and I didn't know what to do and I was lost. And that's a really cathartic experience for someone. If you're struggling with depression, it's my best advice I can give you is just tell people that you're not good. Just don't
Yeah.
hide it anymore, because once you acknowledge it, you're going to see people are going to be supportive. They're going to be
Hmm.
understanding. They want to be there for you when you're not doing well, and you can start to address it as a problem. You can start to address it as an issue to be remedied, and not just the thing you're hiding from everyone. Which is I think was my big problem. Was I just, and that also comes back to comedy, is I felt like I had to be the happy guy. I didn't want to make
Sure.
people sad, and so I told them, and they were like, "Why don't you move back home, and we'll get you better, and then you can go back to New York and stuff." And I never ended up doing that, but I just started to feel like, okay, I can do that. I can move back, and we can clear this up, and I'll realign my life, and I'll get a new job, and I'll do all this stuff,
Hmm.
and just hit a
There are
reset
options.
button. Sorry.
There are options. There are other paths out of the current situation, which is sometimes hard to see, like when you're in the middle of it.
Exactly.
And
And
then suddenly
I
there's a light.
got back into the car, and I was driving back to Astoria, and I was feeling good. I was feeling like there was hope. And I stuck on my iPod, and randomly came on was Less Than Jake. And the song goes something like, welcome back, Outcast, or welcome home, Outcast. I know it's felt like a million years, and looking at you is like looking at me in the mirror. I
And I
know what
know
it's
how it
like to be
feels to
sitting on the
be.
edge of your bed with your head buried in your hands, wishing everything would end. Um, but let me tell you right now, everything's gonna be all right. Welcome home, Outcast. And it was just like instantly, like even now I get chills. Like I got chills up my body, and I was like, oh my God, like it's the sign. Like it was the sign I was looking for. Like it was it. Like
Hmm.
I pulled over, and I just like kind of happy cried. Like just like, oh my God, welcome home, Outcast. Everything's gonna be all right. And looking at you is like looking at me in the mirror. And it was just like, it was just so many times my mom would tell me, like, oh, you're just like my brother Vinny. You're just like Vinny. And I
Yeah.
was doing what he was doing. I was depressed in New York City, wanting to die. And it was like,
Hmm.
and that was so it's a very depressing song. Sitting on the edge of the bed with your head buried in your hand, wishing that everything. And I think there's a line in there about drinking by yourself, getting drunk alone in your room. There's a bunch of lines. I was just like, oh my God, that's exactly what I was doing last
Yeah.
night.
Yeah. And the bridge of that song, even I think the first lyrics are, "So you sit and wait for a sign."
Yes, yes. So you sit and wait for a sign. And it was like, it was so exactly what I was going through. And it was like the first song that popped on. And I was just like, oh my God, like that was the sign. And it was like, yeah, it kind of blew me away. So my life started to like kind of pick up from there. I got help. I did the
Hmm.
thing, and I'm a much happier person now, much more well balanced person there. And it started with Less Than Jake.
Spectacular. I still have probably have Chris's email from when he did the show. I've got to let him know about this because I bet he would be really touched by this story.
Oh, great! I'm glad.
That-
Yeah, I hope so.
that's amazing.
Wait,
Well, I'm so glad
Chris?
you were able. Chris Dem- Chris Demakes from Less Than Jake. He's been on the show.
What? Oh my God!
Yeah,
Please let him know. Please let him tell him to listen to that story. I would love for him to find out. That would be amazing.
I will definitely do that. Well, I'm so glad you. insane, dude. Like to go through to have that like experience, and I'm so glad you're on the other side of it, and you've you took the steps. And to anyone else who's also dealing with depression, asking for help is really strong. It is a strong thing to do. It is a brave thing to do. So,
Yeah,
uh,
it's feels like I think I felt like I didn't ever want to, you don't want to let somebody down. You don't want to make someone sad. You don't want to like disappoint someone. Like it's bullshit. It's a lie you're telling yourself so you cannot change. And your ego is going to try to fool you into staying the same, try to fool you into like saying don't go get help. This is just the way things are. The world is shit. You are shit. Everything is shit. It's not true. It's not true. You can change. You can get better. Just open up and be honest. Just tell someone you're not feeling good. It's the most liberating thing you'll ever do. I swear to God. And then you know what? I don't know if you'll be happy about this. You can bleep it if you want to, but I super endorse psilocybin mushrooms for helping with depression. It changed my life as well.
dude, dude, I similar experience. The one time I did do them, I have never like I can count on like at my hand like the number of times I've been completely free of anxiety and dread, and that was one of them. Seeing the Avengers in 3D as well, very fun at the same time. But yeah, dude. Yeah,
It's
I'm vibing so hard with what you're putting down right now.
fantastic.
So
And okay, if I can just
and
add one thing to it, like the thing that psilocybin mushrooms did for me, which is like, and also if you're struggling with depression, I seriously ask you to address this question: is do you love yourself? Ask yourself that. And if you don't, just do it. Just do it. It is free. It is infinite. It costs you nothing. And if you want other people to love you, the least you could do is start loving yourself. Just love yourself unconditionally. You don't have to put barriers in between it. And I think a lot of us, we think, oh, I'm not going to love myself until I'm successful, or until I have a better job, or until I have a spouse, or whatever. All that good shit comes when you start treating yourself a little bit better. Okay? Because we can all sense it. And when you don't love yourself, you're like a snake that's going around, and you need everyone else to give you love. That's also why I needed to do comedy. Was I needed your love. I needed your adoration. Give me your applause. Give me your laughter. But then I stopped being depressed. I didn't need it anymore because I was a snake eating its own tail. I was a closed
yeah,
circuit. I could be me more easily. I could be happy more easily because I didn't need anything from anyone else. So ask yourself that question very seriously, and there's no reason ever you should say no. No reason ever you should
one
say no.
100%. And where are you? And where are you with comedy now? Are you? I know the pandemic's been rough on all of us in terms of such, but where are you at now with performance?
So this will be a great plug and also explains my attire for the day. So I'll tell you like the quick story. So I did stand up and sketch and improv for like a decade. My cat just bit me. He's like so desperate for attention. You can't even see that he's like clawing at me, trying to get me to pay attention. Hi, hello. Um,
What's your cat's name?
this is Valen. This is Valen. He's great.
Ah,
He's
great
very
name.
affectionate.
Ah,
But so I did comedy for like a decade, and then I literally the day I did mushrooms and permanently cured my depression, I quit comedy just like cold turkey. It was just like gotta do something else. And then me and my brother, we did a short film together. We did that like went to Tribeca, did 140 festivals around the world, won tons of awards. I've got like a shelf back there filled with awards. And then we sold the screenplay to Warner Brothers and New Line, and had like Margot Robbie and Edward Norton and Michael Shannon attached. And then we got to production after years of work, and it shut down on day two because of some political snafu that I probably should not go into. But they had already
oh
spent like
man.
millions of dollars on the movie, and then it fell apart. And while like literally my brother, who's the director, he was on set, like working, building the set, storyboarding,
Mm-hmm.
like fully cast, ready to shoot, falls apart. So that's why I moved out to LA. Then that fell apart. So then I've been doing like the freelance production gig, and I've been doing like production coordinating, producer, financing projects, stuff like that. But then that stuff has just been such a disappointment. Hollywood has been kind of a disappointment. So, and there's been, of course, like little successes here and there, but all in all, it takes so long. And I kind of realized that I kept like waiting for a shoe to drop, and like I was waiting for something to happen so I could do the things I want to do. Like I just kept being like, well, if I get, this job, or if this project takes off, then I'll get to start doing what I want to do, which
Yeah.
was making like YouTube videos and Twitch streaming and
Uh-huh.
just getting to make content that I want to make and I enjoy doing. So today, actually, right before this, I was doing my Twitch stream. I'm like so close to being a Twitch affiliate. I'm so freaking close.
Nice, nice.
So I had my uh, first sponsorship on Monday, which was a fun time. So yeah, so now I'm doing like Twitch streaming and YouTube stuff, and I'm kind of just like making content for nerds.
Sweet.
and that's kind of more my jam. Like, and this kind of comes back around to like all of it, like the development and the arc of my life. But it's like, you know, I didn't grow up with music, and I didn't grow up with movies. I didn't grow up with even comedy. I grew up with a Game Boy and an N64, and I
Sweet.
loved. Oh no, I'm not going to show. It's a podcast. I'm not going to show my tattoos, but I have a Pokemon tattoo, and
Nice.
that was like always my thing. And you know, we talk about doing psilocybin mushrooms, but like when you do that stuff, you start to like really wonder the big questions about yourself. And one of the things I realized about my relationship to entertainment and to the arts, a lot of it comes from a place, which is a good place, but it's like I want my family to be involved. I like love my family. We're all really close. We meet up every Sunday for Sauce Sundays. We always do Christmas together, and not just my dad, and my mom, but my brothers, my sister. We're a
Mhm.
really lovely family. And video games, although they were my passion, felt like the thing only I was into, where making them laugh or doing music videos or films and stuff, or theater shows, that was something we could all do. And, my mom
Mhm.
would do costumes, and my brother Jesse would do set design, and even my sister, she did costumes on my last short film. So it was like a thing. And I think more and more I'm realizing like this is probably the way the future is going, is direct to like this podcast. We're just making
Yeah.
content directly for you. There's no filters, nobody's giving notes, there's no network getting involved. You make the content, you put it out. If you want to listen to it, be my guest. So that's kind of where I'm at
Exactly.
now.
Well, man, you seem like you got your head screwed on right, and there's a real kind of like balanced nature about you. Again, especially having gone through that, again, that machine of like big time show business and getting so close and then having it stop, and then like to see how like centered and like, because again, like I feel like so many of our peers go through this thing where you're going through like the traditional, like, oh, what are the stages, and then you just you start finding like the things that make create to the things you want to create that bring you joy, and then that joy kind of translates through the art and really connects with the people who hear it and dig it. I like your vibe, man.
I appreciate that. Well, I like your vibe too. And I think, I mean, you're doing the right thing here, which like also if you're creative and you're listening, like I think this is some good advice I could give you, is that in Hollywood, like they are looking for creatives, but they're not looking for creatives that can't do it without them. They're looking for the creatives that
Right.
are just doing it. So if I could give you any advice, just do it. I think there's a barrier we put on ourselves, and I've definitely and been guilty of this many times, where you want someone to give you permission to do the thing you want to do,
Hmm.
tell you you're hired as the thing you want to be doing. But the way you get
Right.
that job is by doing it, whether anyone lets you do it or not. And then you
Hmm.
become the thing you want to be, and then you're just it. But so like if you come out here and you want to be a host, you know, you can say, what do you host? Well, now you are a host. You are officially a host. So, and if you're an artist out there of any type, just start doing it. And I think it
Yeah.
took me years to realize, because I think I also like just the teasing of having a network, like, being this close for so long and just constantly getting these updates that are like, next month we're going to be doing this, next month, and you're like, okay, great, and then we're going to set, and then we're going to set for years. And then, the the terrible thing about it is, like, I felt so powerless, because I had these like
Yeah.
celebrities and network heads, and they're fighting over this stupid line in a contract, and ultimately it didn't matter to either of them. Margot Robbie and Warner Brothers don't need my movie. I need my movie. So,
Right.
but
Right.
they're the ones that were in the power, and ultimately, but we gave them that. We gave them that, and so giving away your power to create is kind of a it's double-edged sword, man. And
Hmm.
I think it's gotten to a point now where, I did stand up, I did sketch, I did improv, I've done the screenwriting thing, I've done all this stuff, and but life's always about coming back to who you are, right? And what do you want to do,
Hmm.
and who are you really, and how can you help people? Um,
Yep.
and if anything, what I want to do is I want to help people. I want to be able to talk to people that are depressed and show them a light, show them a path, give them some guidance. And the best way to do that is to talk directly to people with a mic and a webcam. Just say, I got you.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
can come
I
tell me
know
you're sad.
exactly what you mean. Yeah, totally. Like I've learned so much about like so many things just from having conversations with people on this microphone or in this room or like this. Uh it is a underthought of magic to this thing that I and to art in general that I think is really really valuable. Um dude, what's your so let's so this Twitch stream how can people see it?
Oh, so and I hope you like this name. So if you go to twitch.tv/acid ketchum, acid like the dissolvent, and Ketchum, like Ash Ketchum. And actually, but if you don't mind me breaking the fourth wall here for a second, is
Of
this
course.
supposed to be an hour-long thing? Are we supposed to be
Yeah,
wrapping it up here?
we're winding down.
Okay, great. So yeah, so I won't go into another story. So you go to twitch.tv/acid ketchum. You can follow me on Twitter at Shane is not a bird. And then I'm getting onto the other social media stuff now. I don't have a single TikTok, but people keep telling me to do it. And I think I have
Mm.
an Instagram, but don't worry, just do those other two. And if you really want to see photographs of me playing team fight tactics, you'll see it on my Twitch too. But that's good.
Awesome.
Well, Will, thank you so much
Sounds
for having me, man.
dude, thank you so much for doing it. I'm so glad we finally got to sit down and chat. This has been really nice, and I will hit you up next time I'm in LA.
Yeah, and if you tell the guy from Less Than Jake that story, or tell him to listen to this, oh my god, I might shit myself. That'll be huge.
Sounds good. Thank you, Shane.
Dude, a pleasure, Will. Thank you so much.
All right, Shane Snider, everybody. That was a true delight. That was our first time ever, like, really chatting. But like, I feel like it was like talking to an old friend. Like, I feel like that was just a really like effortlessly like wonderful and conversation. And man, I'm so happy to see Shane in the place he is now. Link to his Twitch stream is in the description of this episode if you want to check that out. And thank you all again so much for checking this out, and Shane for your time and candor. I sincerely appreciate it, man, and look forward to hitting you up next time I'm out west. That's our show for today, folks. If you enjoyed this, I have 300 more episodes that you can check out, and you can find links to everything at awesomedisaster.com. That has links to the show on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. If you want to give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple, give us a follow on Stitcher and Spotify. That helps us appease our almighty algorithmic overlords. It's got links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, I'm at Will Carey 23 on Instagram. If you want to see me post fun, if you want to see me post stuff about my life outside of doing this podcast, and you can get your new podcast updates at Between Awesome and Disaster on Instagram. If you want to go a little bit further in supporting the show, we do have a merch store as well as a Patreon, also available at awesomedisaster.com, and you can also check out patreon.com/awesomedisaster. I love the artwork that my friend Mateos designed for the show, and I really would appreciate if you guys wanted to check that. I think we got a promo going on right now, so make sure you check that out and continue to be excellent to yourself. Discover what really brings you joy and do it, because there's a finite amount of time in the universe to do, and it's important to maximize. That's why I had a delightful chicken parm and pasta for dinner, because I'm maximizing what brings me joy, especially after all the biking I did this weekend. So thank you all again so much for being here, and I will see you next time between Awesome and Disaster. Stay safe, wear a mask, get vaxxed and boosted, and stomp out fascism. Take care, everybody.